Hi everyone, my name is Elliot Kwabena. I use he, him pronouns and I'm a Just Like Us ambassador. Today we are here during Now and Beyond to talk a little bit about social media and how it affects our behaviour, our patterns in society and just us in general. I'm joined by Jasmine, who is a mental health nurse, and you may have also seen her on Love is Blind UK. Jasmine, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Elliot.
The question that we're really going to be delving into today is, how do you use social media? What sort of effect does it have on you in your day-to-day life?
I mean, prior to going on the show, social media was a positive outlet for me. It wasn't too much of a day-to-day thing for me. It was just for me to contact friends, to post as and when I wanted to. Now, from being on the show and making that journey onto social media and influencing, obviously I have to use it a lot more. But it's all about balance, right? And the good thing is, with social media now, it is an outlet for me to, share parts of my life, but on my terms. But I think the most important thing that we do need to keep in mind is that balance there, for it not to kind of engulf your whole life, to set the boundaries there, that you can't be on your phone all day, which is very hard to do, especially when it's part of work now, which is kind of an insane thing to say. But yeah, this is my life now. So it's all about balancing, really, and not making it a full part of my day, making sure that I do have a schedule there for myself so that I can be in the present and enjoy moments with my friends, with my family, without the phone.
And I think that's probably one of the healthier outlooks that I've heard from people about social media. I know for myself, I am constantly having to check in and make sure that I'm not spending a ridiculous amount of time every single day on my phone. And when we talk about using social media, I think a lot of the time we are really referring to mindless scrolling. Some people call it doom scrolling, which is a slightly different thing, but just not really taking in any of the content that you're consuming and just filling your time to the point where sometimes you wake up and you realize, oh, I've been in this position for 3 hours and I've somehow gotten to the bottom of the TikTok feeds.
Yeah.
And I think especially when it's something that's really important for you for work, I know for me, I have to keep an eye on my Instagram DMs, for example. And as soon as I'm on the Instagram interface, I see, oh, a fun post that I want to look through, and then I just go from there. Do you have any sort of habits that you try and put in place to stop yourself from getting lost in that endless loop?
I think as a social media user in general, we have to be very mindful of what we consume. I don't know about you, but I have those days where I'm probably not in the right mental space to be consuming the things that I'm mindlessly scrolling about. So I think being mindful of what we intake, as much as we're putting out there, we need to be mindful on both sides, what we digest and what we put out there for the world to see. What I've worked on with my husband, because he's on social media also, is to not have our phones on the dinner table, which is a wild thing to see. It's very cliche to say, but it's actually worked so good for us. Even phones in bed. I know it can be, listen, I'm guilty of that. You're comfy in bed, you want to sit down, you want to scroll a little bit, but then that 1 hour becomes 2, 3, 4 hours. The next thing you know, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're absolutely exhausted the next day. So I think being aware of what you're doing on social media and timing, having a schedule in place would really help you implement those healthy behaviors so that you are using it in an enjoyable and safe way.
Being phone smart, if you will.
Phone smart, exactly.
Yeah.
How about you?
I think for me, I used to try and use Screen Time, the app that's on pretty much everybody's phones these days, but it was just really quite difficult to look at just how many hours I spend, and I honestly have a policy of, I pretend I do not see it, I just don't want to know.
Yeah.
And I think that can be okay as long as you're still checking in with yourself and making sure that, hey, you've got homework to do, you've got chores to do, you've got coursework or work to do. You cannot be spending your whole day on this sort of platform or on this sort of behavior. I use social media a lot more these days to stay informed, to stay educated about certain things. I find that sometimes reading things like the news can be quite time-consuming and not very engaging for me, so I tend to enjoy watching people who do breakdowns of current events and things like that. But you then get into the territory of things like doom scrolling, i.e. going through all of the really bad news pieces, because you really don't have to look that hard to find them. And I'm sure that it sort of has a similar vibe to it as engaging with things like criticism and hate online. How have you dealt with that since being on the show?
It was very difficult initially. I'll hold my hands up. I was a bit of a people pleaser back in the day. And seeing different perspectives of my personal life, my family, my mum received quite a lot of hate. Also, as individuals, not everyone is going to love you. Some people may not agree with your actions. Coming to terms with that and being at peace with that, knowing who I am, knowing that my family knows who I am and my friends know who I am, it's very difficult to do as well, as to block out the negative energy. Because I think as just human beings, we are succumb to just focusing on the negative, as opposed to the millions of positive messages that I received, right? And being really affected by it. So I had to be mindful within myself to know, you know what, this is negative. Don't spend too much time on it. Spend time with people who actually want to positively uplift you as a person, as opposed to all the negative comments, because at the end of the day, we don't know them.
I think opinions, especially negative opinions of people, they've always existed. Everybody has their own thoughts about everybody else, but the thing about social media is that it makes everything accessible. In my lectures, when we talk about things like that, we talk about the democratization of technology and of ideas. And I think with the internet, you then get this over influx of people who have their own personal opinions, but it's now in your face and you can't avoid it unless you take steps to actively do so. And I think as well, it's incredibly difficult when it's not just you people going after, but the people that you love, the sector that you might be working in, the things that you enjoy doing. And it can become really, really vicious and really nasty. And I'm sorry that happened to you. And unfortunately, it's not an uncommon thing either. You don't have to have been on a reality TV show to receive barrages of online hate. I know personally that I have definitely faced some really quite nasty comments and behavior on social media, on all types of social media. And sometimes it really just takes you putting down your phone and remembering that everybody has an opinion on you, but these opinions are quite literally pixels on your screen that you can shut off at any time.
And don't you think that's very powerful, that you are taking matters into your own hands, right? How powerful is that, that you are choosing for them not to affect you? And having that power as an individual to be able to be like, you know what, I'm going to set those boundaries. I am not letting you get to me. Having that power within yourself to make that decision for the benefit of your own mental health and well-being is so powerful. It's not the easiest, I'm not gonna lie, but once you do feel like you do have that power to be able to be like, you know what, I'm gonna block out that negative energy because I know who I am, that's a really special place to be in, you know?
I definitely agree with that. In terms of social media, my history of it has been a little bit different from most, mostly because I grew up LGBT, so I'm gay and I'm also transgender. And that's actually what Just Like Us is all about. We go into schools and we talk about LGBT plus awareness, talk about the different sort of definitions, what we can face as people who are growing up LGBT. And one of the biggest things in my generation especially is that social media was this massive outlet where you could learn about people who were like you. Because so many people, whether they discover that they are gay or lesbian or bisexual when they're 5 years old versus 12 years old versus 23, a lot of people nowadays find these labels and these terms thanks to social media. And so it can be really difficult to try and set these healthy boundaries when a lot of times, a lot of queer people feel like all of their friends are online. And if they remove themselves from that space, they then also remove themselves from that social life and from that community. And so it can be really, really quite difficult, I find, to sit here and tell people, oh, you should stop using your phone as much, because I know for a fact that when I was growing up, some of my only friends, some of the only people who would affirm me, who would make me feel good about myself, were online. But at the same time, it was also the home of people who were making me feel horrendous about myself. And it really affected my mental health, both growing up LGBT in non-supportive environments, but also being on social media constantly and having that comparison to other people, and also everybody having access to you and being able to say horrible things. And I think that sort of leads me on to my next sort of question, because obviously as a mental health nurse, you deal with young people quite a lot. What have you observed in terms of the effects of social media on people today?
As much as social media is a very beautiful way to be able to find people that you can connect with, it's also a sense of kind of freedom of speech, right? You're able to express yourself on your own terms. My experience, especially in the inpatient setting, when it comes to social media, as much as I love people documenting, you know, their journeys, as much as it's amazing to look back on your own memories, I think we also need to be quite aware and take responsibility of what other people are, or how other people may perceive that. Because if you think about it, if someone is feeling vulnerable and they're seeing, you know, kind of a negative experiences of mental health services, that may prevent them from asking for help or seeking for help when they're in, you know, kind of a vulnerable state, or they're not feeling great because of what they're seeing on social media. So I think, you know, we do have to be quite wary and mindful of what we are posting in regards to the health services, because that could save someone's life.
Taking it back to what you said earlier about balance, I think it can be incredibly empowering to be able to talk about your own experience, especially if it's been a negative one, and to be able to say, hey, I had the courage to reach out and ask for mental health help, and this situation that I've been put in has not been helpful to me whatsoever. And I think, of course, while you do have a responsibility as a person for what you put out into the world, I think it's also important that we as individuals learn how to set our own boundaries. So if we are seeing things that upset us, we know what to do in order to come back to ourselves and not be as affected.
I completely agree.
I wanted to give you a little statistic here, since we're just talking about social media and habits in general. According to research, a quarter of children today use social media in a way that is consistent with behavioral addiction.
Wow.
Which is a really scary figure. That is a huge population of children who have now become very, very dependent on social media. And as a mental health nurse, do you have any signs that you look for when you start to realize that someone might have a dependence on social media?
I think there definitely are some signs, especially when, you know, they're kind of building up or developing a reliance towards their phones and social media, you know, going into a room with their phones, going to the toilet with their phones, mindlessly scrolling. Next thing you know, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Your daily activities like going to school, going out with your friends, interacting in conversations, eye-to-eye contact, human interaction has now kind of gone down the drain.
Been replaced with social media.
Through, you know, this virtual world of social media. So I think it's definitely a concerning factor, and it's definitely something that we need to raise awareness on, because it's obviously affecting a lot of children.
And I think the thing about addiction in general is that the first step is obviously admitting that you have a problem. And I think, especially when it's something that gives you a lot of joy and a lot of stimulation, it's something that you don't really want to admit might be causing you harm as well as good. And I think for me, when I realized that I was maybe having a little bit of a social media issue, is when I had screen time active and it would block Instagram, and I just sort of override it and keep going and keep going. And then, you look up at the time and suddenly, oh, it's 4 in the morning, need to go to bed. And so I think these are sorts of things that us as people in general, you don't have to be a mental health expert to know this, should be looking out for. Like, can you leave your phone in another room, or are you constantly sort of reaching into your pocket?
If you look around the street, if you just go down for a walk, see how many people are on their phones,
If you
looking
count
down.
them, yeah.
See how many people you bump into because people aren't even looking up to see where they're going.
That drives me utterly up the wall.
Yeah.
It really, really irritates me.
It's really concerning.
Yeah, especially because people walk out into the road and things like that as well. When your spatial awareness and your world awareness is completely inhibited because you are so involved with your phone and with social media. that's something that can then carry over not just into mental health, but physical health as well. In fact, I swear I saw this one, just like a silly post, a meme of some sorts, where, you know, there's that evolutionary photo where it goes from like a monkey to a human being. There's an extra one that's been added onto it, and it's people who are going like this because they're constantly looking at their phones. And I've honestly found myself in that position more times than I'd like to admit. I call it shrimping, where you sort of just curl over yourself and you look down at your phone or at your screen on your laptop or your iPad or whatever it is. It can start to leach into other areas of your life that you don't necessarily want. And I think at some point you've got to ask yourself, are the 10 videos of cats that I've just watched really worth having semi-permanent shoulder issues?
I know.
I don't think they are.
I feel like, you know what, I think we need to put things into perspective. I mean, as much as looking at cats for hours on end can be quite entertaining, and listen, I love cats, but how is this positively affecting my day, where I can have the most effective day, where I can achieve all my goals and go home tonight, get into bed and say, you know what, I've done my best today. You don't have to save the world or win a medal, but I've actually made an impact to myself, not even others, to myself, to be the best version that I can be. You know, especially when people are at school. The pressure's there, so you know, why not? I can go on TikTok for a couple of hours just to de-stress. But how useful is that to your mental well-being?
Yeah.
When in reality, do you know how powerful it is to just be in the moment? Being with people, human interaction, interacting with others face to face, it's so much more powerful than texting on your phone.
Yeah. I think a lot of kids these days, though, do use social media as a form of very meaningful interaction with people. And I think a lot of the time it can be really difficult to disconnect yourself from that, especially when your parents are constantly getting on you to, oh, get off your phone, why do you never talk to us? And so it starts this cycle of, well, if this is the attitude I get when I am off my phone, why would I get off my phone ever? But at the same time, it means that in the future, things like attention span are really negatively affected, but also being able to make friends in real life, which you ultimately want to do. There's nothing wrong with online friendships. Some of my most treasured friendships are online, but if you can't talk to people in real life and make connections in real life, it's going to make your life a lot more difficult, especially after you leave school, where at least in school, you're with a bunch of other people your age and you're sort of forced together for 8 hours a day. So you end up making these connections and forging these bonds. But as soon as you don't have that structure anymore, it's entirely up to you. And if you don't have those skills,
where do you go from there? And I think we're in our generation right now, it's a generation of social anxiety is increasing. It's at an all-time high. I would agree with you. I've had so many virtual friends from different countries, and it does feel very comfortable to just have that person that knows you, that you can speak to at all times of the night. These skills, these face-to-face skills, body language, engagement is so essential for, I guess, the next steps of our lives when we do venture out to, education or whatever field you want to go into once you have left school. It's so vital. It's all about balance, as we say. We go back to balance, having that good balance. As much as it's good to have a great sense of community and belonging on the social media space, it's also good to have that in real life.
Another thing that I've been thinking about more recently as an activist is how I use social media in order to do things like raise awareness or to find out about demonstrations and protests that are happening, and also to be able to provide monetary support if I can, or help with fundraising for different people around the world who are in conflict zones or are dealing with famine or other natural disasters and things like that. But at the same time, I find myself feeling really low and feeling quite despairing and pessimistic about the world after I log on and just see all of this doom and this gloom. And I think it's an important thing to maybe talk a little bit about how we as activists and as people who want to be politically engaged can do that, but also do it in a way that's not going to negatively affect our mental health.
I think it's very important to speak on matters that you feel passionate about, especially being that voice for people who don't have a voice. is extremely important. But one thing I think is important to keep in mind is your own mental health and your own mental well-being. Because as an amazing thing it is to be a voice for people who don't have a voice, it can also lead to burnout.
I think it's very important, yeah, to check in with yourself, make sure that when you are scrolling on social media or choosing what to post on things like your stories or what to send to friends, making sure also that you stop and take a second to actually read the post that you're posting. The amount of times I've seen people repost stuff that they just have not read. Media literacy is incredibly important, and it's a skill, it's an online skill that is just as important online as it is offline, but especially online, considering how much AI posting there is now, how much misinformation there is just widespread everywhere on the internet. It's a really good idea. There are literal fact-checking websites that you can use. Also, picking up the signs of what is AI imagery and what that actually looks like, because you have ways of being able to tell whether or not something might have been generated or whether or not it's real. And sometimes I think that if you don't necessarily know what you're talking about, silence is also an option. And I think it's a really powerful option when you yourself admit that you don't actually know everything there is to know about the subject. I know I've definitely been guilty of talking about things I really have no business talking about. And it's not because you have any sort of bad interest at heart, but the fact is everybody's still learning, and sometimes the most helpful thing you can do in a situation is sit back and let people who know what they're talking about go and disseminate the information that they need to.
And I feel like, you know, if we are to speak about a certain topic, let's educate ourselves.
Yeah.
Making sure that, you know, everything that we are talking about, because at the end of the day, the people on the receiving end could be someone vulnerable, could be someone young that could take that as gospel.
Yeah.
So, you know, putting responsibilities on what we put out there is so important, because we don't know who's receiving what we're putting out there. And if people are misinformed, that could be quite dangerous.
I think in schools we learn quite a lot about what might be a reliable resource and what isn't for things like essay writing. And I think it would really help to apply those skills to things on social media as well, because obviously there are many people who are experts in their field who use social media. You as a mental health nurse, I know that there are doctors and lawyers that talk about different cases and things like that, but we've also got to remember that TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, those aren't reliable sources on their own. People can say anything they want to at any time, and if it's not backed up by actual research, you might want to take a pause and think about whether or not you should be sharing that in the first place.
1000%, I agree.
Yeah. And I think that sort of wraps up everything we've been talking about today. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really enlightening, and I think that hopefully this gives everybody a sort of new perspective on using social media. I think a lot of people wag their finger at social media users and social media use in general and say, you know, that's bad for everybody. But I don't think that that's true. I think it can be used as a very positive tool, as long as we also have these checks and balances in place to make sure that we're engaging with others in a healthy way and engaging with ourselves in a healthy way.
I completely agree. I've had so much fun having this discussion with you. It's been great and enlightening. Yeah, I agree. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everybody for watching this. Hopefully you take this as sort of inspiration to make a more healthy decision going forward with how you engage with social media. Here are the Phone Smart top tips on how to reduce dependency on social media. Number 1, wear a watch. Rely on an analog watch and not your mobile phone to tell the time. This can reduce the number of times you reach for your device and also reduce the number of times that you're distracted by notifications, unlocking your phone and landing knee-deep in a stranger's feed on social media that doesn't add anything to your life. Number 2, go grayscale. Your brain won't be as stimulated by the bright colours, so you won't get the dopamine hit that these colours elicit. Number 3, scroll mindfully. Scroll with intent. Making a conscious choice to scroll helps to ensure you're scrolling with purpose and therefore won't be as easily swayed by the algorithms. And as always, stay phone smart.